Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Green Dragon Podcast. I'm your host, Aiden.
And your fellow host, Tom.
And your fellow host, Jake.
The crew is back. We've made it another week. I'm taking things week by week these days. There's no guarantees in life, especially now. And you've got like a delusional, probably a person that should be institutionalized running your country and your president. So I just try to hang in there and pretend that everything's okay, even though it's not. I almost I saw something today on the news, and it was like why the banks are going to steal all your money or start stealing your money to pay back their loans, and why you should pull all your money out of your account. So I almost pulled out like every last penny out of my bank account today. I was almost in that panic mode. But I talked myself out of it for a minute, and then bought a few micro shares of Bitcoin and calmed myself down. It's been an interesting week. We had a balloon flying around in our skies for like a whole week. The Chinese spy balloon. It took us a whole week to shoot it out of the sky. Not sure why. We
flew over 3 Air Force bases too.
Yeah, it started out in Montana by the Air Force Base, and they said it was a national security issue, and then turned out they just let it fly over the whole damn country. Makes sense. Give them some good views before you take them out. So we took them out over South Carolina. Made it all the way to South Carolina from Montana. It's pretty good flight. This thing was impressive. This thing had like a whole freaking satellite attached to the bottom of this balloon. It was pretty intense. I don't know what pictures they were taking. I waved at the sky a few times when I thought it might be over my head. So I could be on some, Chinese news site somewhere. Like crazy Georgia citizen, flies the bird to space balloon. Who knows? I don't know what you guys think. They're saying there's another in one of these spy balloons somewhere, I think in Canada right now. But it just seems to me like at this point, we should be probably doing a better job at securing our airspace and borders. And I don't understand why we have spy balloons just randomly floating around in our skies. Seems like a national security issue to me. But what do I know? I'm not in the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and it's made me wonder, like people ask a question like, why do they keep letting this happen? I wonder if we should be asking a different question now. Like, I don't think it's unintentional anymore. I think it's gone far beyond.
Yeah, it seems far too. Yeah, it seems like far too calculated to be just an accident or a coincidence that these things are happening. And you start to wonder when you hear China say things like, spreading their propaganda. They say we're spreading the propaganda, of course. But when they're spreading propaganda saying that, the U.S. took a calculated action, will have to deal with the measures taken. They'll have to assess and deal with the measures taken by the U.S. very seriously. It's like you were flying a spy balloon over our country. I don't think. I think we should have shot it down far sooner, and I don't think any sort of retaliation against that should be taken by China. So I think it's just the way I think, especially the Chinese government and military and the president is all addressing this situation. I think it's, if you look at how they're doing it, they're not like in no means were they backing down. If anything, they spun it in the direction of, this is the U.S., showing aggression towards China, and we're willing to take all measures necessary to protect China, that sort of thing. And so when you have a country that's doing the things that China is doing, like flying spy balloons all over the U.S. and then doubling down on it and saying, this is when they're shot out of the sky, this is action taken by the U.S. government that shouldn't have been taken. I mean, it just kind of shows like where they're at and what they're willing to do. And I think it is very telling of their long-term, short-term plans as far as how they are going to proceed with their interactions with us. I think we have to be careful not to let up any more than we already have, even though we've kind of set a precedent by just not doing anything.
You guys hear about that? U.S. Air Force general that predicted we'd be at war with them by, I think it was 2025. So we'd be at war with the CCP.
That's what I heard. Yeah,
I'm not really sure what he's basing that prediction off of, but I mean, I feel like he would know something, being that high up in our military complex.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know where he's getting kind of his information from. I mean, I'm sure he's probably got pretty decent intel if he's that high up, but it makes you wonder if the people that are high up in the military saying this, like, I mean, I guess what I don't understand is what's stopping it from happening right now. You know what I mean? I mean, if China wants to get into it that bad and we don't seem to really care what they do, what's not stopping them from attacking now and or kind of playing the cards out? And I don't know if I don't know what your guys' thoughts on this are. I'm not like fully sure like an attack from China will manifest itself as a physical attack. Like, I have a very strong belief that the next war that we will fight will be very much a war fought on the battlegrounds of tech and currency. And I think the battlegrounds of the future will, and I think the battles are already being fought. I think spreading kind of distrust in or dissent in your enemy's country is the kind of the first step, and then destroying their currency is probably the second step, because it's what holds that nation. It's what holds that country together. And if they don't have a strong currency, then they're weak. And then I think lastly, like if you're able to take out their power grid, that's huge, or their infrastructure. So like, I don't know what you guys think. If I was going to wage a war quietly, I would do it by those means rather than fighting a physical, kind of what we think of as a physical military action. I don't know. It just seems like a better, more strategic way to fight is to weaken your opponent through money, infrastructure, and destroying them from the inside.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When you look at it economically, I mean, China's in far too strong a position against us for it to be advantageous for them to initiate a physical war. I mean, we're running currently right now one of the largest trade deficits in the world, and about 1/3 of that is comprised of a deficit to China. So in other words, 1/3 of our net imports come from China. And then it's vice versa for China. They're running a positive trade with us. So it's, yeah, I think it wouldn't really make sense for them to come in and either whatever their goal would be to take over land or just make a show of force. I don't think that would really make sense for them, just because they're in such a stable position right now against us.
Yeah, if I were China, I think my ultimate goal would just be to completely like weaken us and take us off the competitive space. Like just completely it 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 would greatly benefit them to see the self-demise and the self-destruction of the American people and the American, structure, economically, all those things. And if they were able to destroy us, especially if there was, if we are about to see the recession and economic downfall that has been building and brewing for the last 20 years, that we all kind of see coming, if we're to see that, it would essentially, worst case scenario, completely wipe us off the face of the competitive sphere, like as an economic power. We would be completely wiped off the face of the earth, as far as our control goes. We'd have zero control. So yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit nerve wracking. It seems kind of inevitable. I don't know if there's a way out of it, but it just kind of seems like, when you're looking at all the warning signs, when you got Chinese infiltrating our brains with TikTok, and then you got the Chinese flying around balloons over our heads, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. We're going further and further into debt with China and all this stuff. I mean, it seems, the writing's on the wall, so to speak. It's something's gonna happen, guys. I don't think it's gonna be very pretty, but something's gonna happen.
Speaking of China and TikTok, did you see Greg Abbott in Texas is planning to initiate a statewide ban?
I
For
heard
the
about the
app?
ban.
Yeah,
I mean, I say good for Greg. Um,
I don't
Greg's
know.
doing we'll see
Yeah.
we'll see how the rollout. I mean, in theory, great idea. Good for Greg. How is the rollout gonna work?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not
Um,
really sure how that's going to be enforced only in Texas.
I mean,
But
there's a lot of basic white girls in Texas. So, and this is, no offense to Texas women. I'm not trying to say anything bad about Texas women. Most of the basic white women in Texas are actually moved from California and Arizona after, the whole COVID thing. They're the ones ruining the state currently. Um, yeah, I just don't know how the rollout's going to happen when you got all those people addicted to TikTok. I mean, that's the problem. Like at this point, like if they would have cut it early on, like if Trump's, like I remember when Trump first talked about the ban on TikTok, and like other apps, like what was the other one? Oh, is it like WeShare or We something, right? WeChat,
yeah,
WeChat,
we
WeChat,
chat. Yeah.
WeChat.
Yeah.
And I actually had that app for a while because when I went to China, it was the only way to communicate. I got that thing off my phone as soon as I came back. Trust me. It was a little creepy. I felt like the Chinese were spying on me at all times over there. It was wild. Anyways, besides the point, like if they would have cut it then before like the big like TikTok rush that we had, I don't know what you say it was. Probably was it about a year and a half ago, would you say was the big TikTok like boom? I felt like it was about a year and a half. Maybe it was 2 years ago. I don't know because I've never gotten TikTok, so I don't I haven't really paid attention to it that much. But was it about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago maybe?
I think, yeah, we're coming up on like 2 years ago because I remember it really blowing up during the pandemic when everybody
Mm,
was stuck inside and didn't
okay.
really have much else to do. And I think
And
it was, you already had your influencers and
hmm
hype house, sway house types of people, but
well, didn't it
um,
start as an app called like Musically or something?
musically, yeah,
Musically, okay,
yeah. So
okay.
it was originally like people would film themselves singing
Mm,
to an actual song, not the voiceovers or the like lip syncing that they do now. It was actual singing. Just it was a
mm.
stupid app, just making embarrassing videos of yourself, which it still is. But now people are actually taking pride in the videos and making it like it's some kind of talent. um, Yeah, but now it's kind of. I'm not sure when exactly it
because
transformed. I know
because
somebody bought them, and then
because I
I think it
think
was
this. Yeah, I think you're right. It was all about the same time, and somebody was like talking about buying them, some U.S. company, right? So they could keep running, and this was at the same time that Trump was talking about banning them, and it was the same time they really boomed. So I thought that was kind of like I was thinking in the back of my head. I was like, if I remember right, it boomed right around the same time it was supposed to be banned, and I mean, look what it's become. And that was kind of the turning point, I feel like. I think if you could have banned it, it was during that point. But now it's out of control. I mean, there's just literally no way to. I just don't understand how you're going to enforce it because I don't think there's a way. Like, obviously, they'll take it off the App Store in like certain states. But then, like, okay, what if you travel to a different state? Um, Like, are you just gonna are you gonna shut down all usage of the app within your state lines? Is it gonna be like one of those things where like once you get a new update on your phone, you can't use the app because it's the old version? Like, I just don't understand. Like, it's hard when it's on a state level. If it was a federal level, it'd be very easy to control this. But because, and I don't think the federal government, this is my take. I don't think the federal government should be making any more laws about what we can and can't do, personally, just my opinion. I mean, this is kind of a national security issue, but they also use that to use Big Brother and turn Big Brother on us back in the early 2000s. So I don't trust him very much at all. Um, that's just me. I know some people will disagree, but I just prefer the federal government to stay out of things. I think on state level it's great, but like, how are you going to enforce that with like technology? How are you going to enforce like a ban on an app? Because couldn't they just go to like, I don't know, Oklahoma and download TikTok and like come back to Texas and use TikTok? Like, I mean,
yeah,
it's like going to
yeah,
Oklahoma for gambling at 18 on the Indian reservations. You can just drive across the Texas border, gamble some money away. I've gotten invitations. I'm thinking about going, guys. Now I'm 21 now, so it doesn't even matter. But it's like one of those things. It's like it's when it's state to state, I just don't know how you enforce it, especially with something like it's not as simple as like, okay, we won't serve alcohol to anybody underage in Texas anymore. Like this is a very like technical thing, so I don't know how you shut that down. But there's probably somebody out there that has a fantastic explanation. Actually, we should ask. I think next week Peter's going to get on the podcast. We should ask him if there's a way for Texas and Abbott to shut down TikTok. He's a computer guy. He's smart when it comes to this stuff. Maybe we'll get on Peter as our TikTok expert. I don't think Peter has TikTok, so I don't think he'll be much assistance. But it's worth a shot.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I mean, I was listening. I have like 6 hours left of Atlas Shrugged. I'm in this part right now where the main guy that kind of is showing the lies of the world and how the looters and the centralizers and pretty much all the bad guys, what they do to try to take control. And the first thing they do is try to convince people that their mind doesn't work. Essentially, like, you can't believe your senses, you can't believe what people tell you is true. The only thing you can believe is like what they tell you and what they to work for them to like enslave yourself as a productive force, and then they take everything you own. So they just want people to be like minions for them, pretty much. And if you have your own mind, then that's a wrench in their plans, because then they're like, oh, we can't just use you as a cog in the machine anymore because you're going to walk off or something.
Hmm.
And I was just thinking about this with school. I don't know if you guys know this, but 91% of all teachers are socialists.
Hmm. That's crazy. That's
So,
91, you said?
yeah, it's
Wow.
insane. So, it's like these poor kids, they go to school. The schools pretty much tell them, and you can do whatever you want, that America is bad. You don't know of your own mind. You can't be a man or a woman. You can't own your life. You can't be self-sovereign. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything because it's all unsafe, quote unquote, and it's for the public good, whatever that means. And then, so I just find it really sad that all these poor kids have been poisoned in their minds, and that poison is just leaching out and then to everything they do. And like China can come over and say like, hey, look at this dumb app, and you'll spend 5 hours of your day on it for every day of your life so far for the past couple of years. I don't know. I feel so sad about all these kids. Like, they're being robbed of their futures with nothing in return.
Yeah, it's depressing to see the youth wasted away on something like this. I think it's interesting you brought up the importance of like the importance of good education and how that's kind of been, slowly destroyed over time. Actually, one of the things during my research this week that I thought was a really neat point was Thomas Jefferson actually believed that the only way for freedom to be true freedom was through the education of its citizens, education of the citizens of whatever the country was, which is why he believed so heavily in the importance of like the written word and educating yourself on different things. And so I think that's a really interesting point you bring up, because I think the less educated you are, or the more brainwashed you become, the easier it is for you to become like a cog in the machine. And it's easier for them to control who you are, what you say, what you do, what you believe. And so I think just that brainwashing, that rewiring of the youth that we see through social media and TikTok, and just in the education system itself. I mean, it's a serious threat to not only the freedom of our nation, but just like, I mean, we're talking about individual freedoms here, and this is why people should care. Because if you let this get out of hand, all of a sudden, you won't have the freedom to believe in certain things, to do certain things, um, and you'll be caught up in a whirlwind that's unstoppable. So I thought that was interesting that you brought that up, because even our founding fathers recognized the only way for true freedom was through education, and kind of that autonomous nature of education of the citizens, and the freedom to learn and think your own thoughts and believe your own things. I think that's something that's being attacked more and more.
Right, yeah, I hope I didn't sound too angry there, but I just was thinking about, like, how the golden rule is to think of others as you want to be done to yourself. And I was just thinking about, like, if my mind was robbed and I couldn't make my own decisions, how that would be so dreadful for me. And then I just think about all those other kids that they don't have the defense mechanism in place to defend themselves from those poisoning thoughts. Like the simple one that we kind of grew up with, that we tried to help people out of, was like, don't be relativistic. I think that one thing's one way for one person, one way for another, because they say there's no absolute truths, but that in itself is an absolute truth by trying to say that. So there's all these contradictions, and this was something heavily expounded on in this book. Was said to always check your premises, so your starting point and thought. So we all have certain starting points that we engage thinking and thoughts from. And so if you're on the wrong track, you're going to end up in the wrong place. Like a common example of that is I guess like how people think that wealth is limited and how there's only so much to go around. So if you have that mentality, you'll finally end up as a person that wants to steal from people, because that's the only way you can see yourself having enough, is just you take it from somebody else. If you take your axiom or your premise is that wealth is infinite because the human mind's ability to keep creating and making new things is limitless, then you look at yourself like, what can I do to provide value for others, and in return receive a wage and buy goods. So it's like two very distinct premises, but if you're talking to people or you're trying to tell them that, look, there's a lot of stuff that isn't connected with the truth anymore, they're trying to tell you these things so they can control you, they defend the very people that are destroying their lives, because to them to think that they've been wrong for so many years or months or however long it is really hard to accept. But the thing is, like, if you can accept that, like if you can have the humility to say that I was wrong, then from now on you can have a much better life. And I think people are really afraid to think that they're wrong because they have this instinctual desire to want to be wanted or loved by people. So if they think they've been wrong and then they see it, well, who else has seen it? So they try to defend their past beliefs and hope that they were right so that people don't turn on them. But in reality, the good people, they want you to come back. They want you to see the truth so you can have a better life. So we're not going to turn on people that finally see the truth. We're going to embrace them and say, hey, welcome back. Like, you're in the right place now.
Yeah, I think the first step to any dictatorship is to destroy the truth. And I think the best way, and we're seeing this now, to destroy any truth is to create infinite amounts of truth in the minds of the people. So we hear, oh, well, that's your truth, or that's my truth, or that's his truth, or that's her truth. So if there's infinite amounts of truth, then there's no actual truth. And then there's nothing to lay the groundworks of what is virtuous and what is right and what is wrong in society. And then truth can be manufactured by whomever has the most power. So it's definitely being played out right now. Going into sorry to take this pod to take it in a little bit of a different direction, but sort of related to this. I mean, this isn't something that's like new by any means. I mean, the founding fathers saw this when they were getting started and writing the Constitution, writing the Declaration, all these things, and trying to put together the framework of the United States. John Adams believed that he wasn't confident in this idea of the American experiment, and he believed that people needed to sacrifice more in order to have a strong country, and he believed that the American people's character was too weak to build to build a successful country. He believed that Americans were selfish and corrupt and addicted to luxury, and he thought we were too weak in our moral character for a republic to work. which I thought was really, he was very pessimistic, man. I don't know how anybody got along with John Adams. I mean, my gosh, this guy was I mean, talk about what's that character from Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore? I mean, John Adams was I mean, he was Eeyore. I think Eeyore's character was based off John Adams. John Adams basically just walked around and was like Debbie Downer. I mean, he was like the first party pooper. I mean, he could have started his own political party and they would have been called the Party Poopers. I mean, it was pretty bad. I mean, he was a real loser when it came to trying to lift your spirits. But yeah, he didn't believe that the American people had. He thought they lacked in virtue, and I think he was somebody that was very idealistic. And so when he saw the lack of virtue in the American people, he was just really. I think pessimistic about our future. And I mean, obviously the country survived till today, but when you look at when the country has flourished rather than done poorly, I think you see people in leadership, and you see, people that typically are acting with a stronger moral backing. They're on a moral high ground. There's more virtue within the country. It's functioning better. And when that virtue, when those morals start to deteriorate, when that truth becomes, when the cardinal truths kind of become lost, we start to fall apart a little bit. So I don't think he was that far off, in what he was seeing. I think when you let things, when you become selfish, when you become corrupt, when you become addicted to luxury like we are today, addicted to just complacent. I mean, we're complacent, we're lazy, we're addicted to luxury. And I think when that happens, it just lends to a weakened nation. Especially when you're in a republic and you're not living in a dictatorship where one person's able to control kind of everything. When you're in that, when you're in the structure that we have as a government, I think it when we see the people start to degrade morally, we see the country fall apart.
Yeah, I think there is always a place for people with the temperament of John Adams, that more pessimistic attitude, just because if you look at it on a personal level, if everyone is always just telling you how great you are and that everything's fine, then you'll never learn any of your weaknesses or find anything to improve upon. And if you extend that out to a national level, I think that holds true. That yeah, if you just, it's too easy to fall into that complacency if there's not someone, no matter how much we get annoyed or dislike them for kind of dampening the spirits or seemingly dampening what we think is a prosperous society. I think it's always good to have those voices kind of calling into question her character, and providing a balance. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, and I think that's what was really cool about the founding fathers. If the listeners haven't already gathered this, we're going to talk about the founding fathers today on our podcast as our main topic, and just kind of that early part in the history of our country. But I think one of the cool things about the founding fathers was there was it wasn't it definitely was not a bunch of guys that all had the same exact idea and the same approach to going about that idea. Obviously, they all had the same goal of gaining independence from the king, right? At the time, gaining the independence of the colonies. But all of them kind of had a different outlook on how it should be done, a different approach. So I think when you have those differing points of view, but still have the same common goal and can work together to achieve that same common goal, those differing points of view or opinions or just frameworks of thought, I think those lend to each other because you're able to, it's not all groupthink, right? You're able to, shoot down bad ideas and bring up the good in somebody else's ideas and point out the flaws and one person's ideas, but also show the strengths in their ideas. So I think it lends to the creation of something that's been honed at least slightly, at least, edited and kind of honed away to a certain extent. Because, I mean, you really had two completely opposing views in Jefferson and Hamilton. And they, in the end, had the same goal, was to gain independence and freedom from the king. But you had Jefferson, who believed, in giving the power to the people, was very worried about the consolidation of power. Very, what I would consider probably in modern day terms, libertarian, right? And then you had Hamilton, who is almost the complete opposite. I mean, Hamilton was, when they drafted the Constitution, he was disappointed with the fact that the federal government didn't have more power and the president, didn't have more power, and he was very. I think his line of thought was that government seemed to work better when there was some sort of monarchy. I think he was a little bit of a, I don't want to say like a sympathizer, but he kind of envisioned the structure that the British government had for the US to a certain extent. So you had those two people, the very different, Jefferson and Hamilton, very different opposing viewpoints. But at the end of the day, they were both in the group of men that founded this nation, and they both shaped in their own way, the structure of the United States. So you can't really say you could get rid of one of them and have the same country that you have today. So they're both very important and integral in the founding of our nation, but very different viewpoints, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, it is interesting. It seems like it's always been the case of having two parties really in the US, one that's for centralized, one's for decentralized government. That was something that Alexis de Tocqueville in his book Democracy in America talks a lot about. He said that he thinks America would always have only two parties because you're gonna have one party that's for freedom, and that's the American idea, and have one that's against freedom, and that's the anti-American idea. And throughout history in the US, you've always had that. You almost say throughout the whole world, you've always had that.
It's like the yin and the yang, and one isn't possible without the other. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I personally like Washington's approach. Washington's main qualm, it seemed like, with the founding of the U.S. was that he was disappointed in the political system, the parties, and the structure. And he thought, I think, for the most part, he thought that the political parties were pretty much detrimental to a Republican, the Republican government. And he really hated the rivalry between Jefferson and Hamilton. And I don't blame, I mean, it's tough. As much as I want to say we need political parties, and I think we always, I mean, at this point, we always will have political parties, right? But this idea of this bipartisan leader that's able to unify the people, not by what parties they are in, but just the country's, benefit, by leading based on what benefits the country most at that time. I think he was that type of leader and believed that the parties just divided the people, which I think to a certain extent they still do that, right? They always have. And his kind of viewpoint on the political parties is it was a weakness because it it showed weakness in character um, to believe or to be partial to your political party's beliefs, even if it came to the detriment of the republic. And I think that's something that can be taken away from Washington, because there are certain points when, no matter what viewpoint you hold, you're going to have to realize that there needs to be room for compromise. And if you aren't able to compromise for the betterment of the nation, then you're just doing it a disservice. So I think that's what he saw. I think he saw the pride and hubris in thinking my way is the best way. And so I think that was kind of his qualms with the political parties and the structure, is he saw the division it could sow within the nation, at that time with Jefferson and Hamilton, the Federalists. So I think those were his qualms. I kind of like his approach. I think that everything should just be done for the betterment of the nation, and the political parties should be kind of, because I think in essence the political parties were created based on individuals' ideas and thoughts, and that's how everything is. So it's very idealistic to say there's not going to be political parties or inherent bias, but at the same time, wouldn't it be nice to throw that bias aside and just do things for the the betterment of the republic, the society? So I don't know. It's very idealistic, but I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation, because I read the Federalist a lot of the Federalist papers in school, and when I was in high school, I read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. This time it was just the Federalist, but the Anti-Federalist had a lot of really good points to make about some of the things that I guess Hamilton and the Federalists were trying to go for. Like, there was one check and balance that the Anti-Federalists wanted to put in place, and if it was in place, we wouldn't have had Clinton or Obama, and probably not Biden in office. And it was a really good check, and the Federalists kind of steamrolled it and said, well, George Washington was such a good honorable man, every other president is going to be a good and honorable man, so we don't have to worry about it. And I was pretty upset, because I was like, you dum-dums, like haven't you ever met any other human being? Like, everyone has their flaws and not going to be perfect, like you can't just expect someone to be good because the first guy was good. So I wonder if like you were saying before, Aiden, like some of that hubris was in their decision making, because if you think about it more, it seems like if we had a little bit more anti-federalism, that would have helped a lot with making sure we would have prevented a civil war, we prevented all that's happening now, like instead of just complete overreach of almost every part of the government now.
Yeah, I'm curious, Tommy. You mentioned that if they would have written a little bit differently, we wouldn't have had the president. Sorry, maybe I missed it. What was written that would have prevented like Clinton, Obama, and Biden being president?
I don't remember it exactly, but it would have put in some preconditions for a president that wouldn't have allowed them to be president. It was something to the effect of like how they were elected, I think.
Okay.
So it would have been more of like a highly thought of decision rather than just like pumping the ballots full of people to get the delegates that would just. But I had something else too. It was really interesting. I need to find it. But
Yeah, I might have to look into that a little bit more. That's interesting. Yeah, it seems that it seems that a lot of the things that were put forward by the Federalists kind of, I don't think any of the Federalists, even Hamilton, I don't think any of them thought that the government would get this out of hand. Because I think if they would have seen where we're at right now, they'd be disgusted, quite frankly. Even Hamilton. And I think it's disgusting. Because you think about, we went to war over very small taxes. We went to war over taxes on tea. I mean, these were on specific items, and they were very minuscule in comparison to the taxes we pay today. If they saw the taxes alone that we pay today, they probably would have had a completely different approach to their writing of the Constitution. So, bear that in mind. I think that a lot of the things that Hamilton and the Federalists put forward in their thoughts and in their ideas, and that manifested themselves through in the Constitution, I think to a certain extent, whether intended or not, did not put enough limitation on the federal government. And that's led us to where we're at today. So it's one of those things. It's like, well, it's one of those things. It's like hindsight's 2020, right? So nothing's going to change, but maybe if we would have had a little bit more influence from the anti-federalists, it might look a little different today. So yeah, it's really tough to say, because who knows? We might not, like, you want to say that would have made us better off, but in the long run, would we still be here if that was the case? If we didn't have a strong federal government and some of the things that we've endured as a nation? I don't know. And that's the thing. Like, a lot of the founding fathers, including John Adams, didn't think we were going to make it 5 years as a nation. And here we are in 2023, right? And so I think it's easy to play the doom and gloom game like John Adams and say, oh, we're not going to make it. This is the end of the republic, blah, 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 blah. This, again, it's always been the case. It was the case, back when, just like any of the major events in our history, I think there were certain groups of people that said, this is, the end of the republic. It's all over, blah, 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 blah. Yet here we still are. So obviously, we're much more resilient than everybody believed. I think we're at a very interesting point in our history, though. And that is I think this is kind of the pivotal moment, and whether America continues down the path that our founding fathers intended, and we've already starting to take this course, but we take the course of what it could become, which is a socialist nation. And I think that's very possible. So it's just, it's tricky. And you know what's interesting? We actually started the American, I think it was in one of the podcasts I shared with you guys. I forget which podcast it was, but they talked about like the first like American colonies, and they talked about how they tried the socialistic kind of approach to things, and they had everybody grow crops for the settlement, and everybody would contribute, and they tried to do that. And guess what? The women were like supposed to pitch in, and the kids were supposed to pitch in, and the men were supposed to pitch in. Everybody got lazy because they weren't like seeing the benefits of doing their work, and everybody was getting the same thing, which is basically socialism. And so then he was like, no, screw this. He gave each like family a piece of land. They produced their own food, and then they got to keep whatever, they produced. And all of a sudden, everybody was doing great, and they flourished. So that was the beginning of the sort of American colonies, the American story. And so it's funny to see sort of, I don't want to say a regression back to that, but it sort of has been a regression. We we started with this socialistic experiment for the first like year of the American colonies, and then we realized it didn't work, and so we switched over to more of a capitalistic approach, and then now we've regressed back to the socialism that we first started and failed. So it's very interesting. I think in most societies, this and countries and civilizations in history, this kind of ebbs and flows. So I don't think this is like in the bigger picture, as much as I want to believe in the superbness of America, and I really want to believe in our people. I think people are people, and we're just all going to end up going down the same paths we always go down because we never learn from our mistakes. It's just a flaw of being a human being. And so I think we're just going to see a little, I think the American people will endure. I think that's the beauty of the American people. I think we're tough people, but I think we're going to see a little bit of change probably in how our governments run, and we'll probably end back to at one point we'll have another uprising, and we'll get back to where we were, hopefully. But we're here right now. I say we turn into the Sons of Liberty and just start like tar and feathering people. And no, I shouldn't say that. That's gonna get us banned off YouTube. No, and that's I'm not encouraging violence here, but I think it's important to look at the big picture and see where we came from and stand true to our beliefs, but realize that things are unfortunately not always going to be perfect, as much as we'd love them to be.
Yeah, I think it is easy to get down in the dumps looking at the state that we're in as a country. But at the end of the day, this is something that I'm forgetting what the name of that Sons of Liberty podcast that we listened to. I'll drop the name in a second here, but the narrator on that brought up a good point. He was discussing how the Sons of Liberty, like their motto or their MO is kind of to take action, and he drew the comparison to the world today, the political landscape, where there's a lot of disgruntled people that like to voice their opinions and kind of act as the keyboard warriors and whatnot. But the difference is that you can take action, you can actually go out and make a difference, which is what the Sons of Liberty did. They saw that the country was in a state of oppression, and they actually went out and did something about it. So I think that's something that's important to keep in mind whenever you're starting to feel a little uneasy or unhappy about what's going on, is that there's always something you individually can do to rectify the situation.
Yeah, that podcast, I pulled it up here. It was a episode of the Patriot Power podcast, and it was called it was episode 9, bonus episode, Sons of Liberty. It was a really interesting podcast. I enjoyed listening to it. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the other interesting thing he pointed out is, the Sons of Liberty were known for taking action, often violent action, like tar and feathering people. But their violence or their when they did things that were destructive were their last resort. They first tried to negotiate peacefully, and then when they thought it was necessary to take that physical action, they took the physical action, but it was done in a way that was very planned out and and he brought up the point, it's nothing like, the riots that we're seeing nowadays, where, obviously people are upset with where we're at as a country, whatever the reason might be. But when you're destroying things willy-nilly, when you're just burning down buildings and rioting and looting, you're not actually creating any sort of dialogue, I guess, around the issue you're fighting for. You're just creating anarchy. And that's not what the Sons of Liberty tried to do through their actions. They actually tried to create, make a point, create create a purpose behind what they were doing. It wasn't just to stir anarchy. This was something very calculated. And that's what I found fascinating. Like, everything they did was very, very calculated. I thought, it's just, I think they were a pretty fascinating group of people. The fact that they had John Hancock in the mix, who's like the most wealthy man in the colonies at the time. And he kind of cemented himself in and wove himself into the framework of the Sons of Liberty. And he really used his influence and his power to at the risk of being caught and tried and killed for executed for treason, he risking basically everything he had, he kind of wove himself into this revolution. So I thought some of the members were fascinating, but I think just this idea of a group of men getting together and fighting back against something they saw as tyrannical, but doing so in a way that was very calculated, planned out, methodical, and wasn't just, like you said, Jake, they weren't keyboard warriors. They weren't just complaining. They actually did something about the injustices that they saw.
Yeah, I like that little anecdote that the narrator of the podcast told, where they went in Boston Harbor, dumped out the 40, or no, it was like 92,000 pounds of tea, I think it was. But to get into the little cellar of the ship where they were storing all those crates, they had to break a padlock. And someone actually, after that night, after they'd all dispersed, the group came back the next day and actually replaced the padlock on the ship. And that was the only thing during that whole night, other than the tea, that was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it just spoke to the fact that they didn't let it get out of control. It was a very calculated protest. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they knew exactly what they were protesting. They weren't letting their emotions run wild and turn it into something that it's not.
Yeah, they really just hammered home the point of what they were trying to do. I said, this isn't about destroying your property. This is about injustice in taxation without representation. So, they only left the tea, which I thought that was it was great. It was a great anecdote. It was a great story. I think too, just what I found kind of interesting about the Sons of Liberty too was the way they used the media at the time in their favor. And I think we like to think that the media back then was somehow better, but I think the media was pretty biased. Whether you were reading a British newspaper or whatever, but it was pretty biased to whoever was writing it, and whatever their political viewpoint was. So it wasn't much better than our news sources are now. But I thought it was interesting that they used the media to spread their message, to spread their ideas, to spread their thoughts. And I think that's something that we see now maybe a little bit with platforms like Turning Point USA and and the Daily Wire and places like that are trying to not necessarily stir stir a revolution in thought and try to bring people back to thinking in ways that are logical, that make sense, that are that have this moral framework around them, instead of kind of just listless media that's pushed by the mainstream media. So I thought that was kind of interesting to throw those parallels into perspective and just see that, you know, the media has been always a tool, especially when it comes to revolution, to spread ideas, to kind of spread, I think, in a sense, hope, that you're not the only one that believes in a certain cause.
Yeah, that's a good point, Aiden. Something that I read in de Tocqueville's book too. He said that there's this problem of when you have a media source, how do you keep it from becoming too biased? And he congratulated America on our tactic, I think you could say, of keeping that out of the worst hands. And that was making many, many news stations. So people can come to their news by different ways, so they're not stuck with one way. And I thought it was also interesting how you mentioned that John Hancock was an extremely valuable leader and the Sons of Liberty. He was also one of the richest men in, was it Boston? Boston?
I think not only Massachusetts, but I think also he was arguably one of the most wealthy in the 13 colonies at that point.
Wow.
So he was up there, like top 5. Like we're talking like Elon Musk level rich.
It's so interesting because if you look at it, the men that are doing the most right now to promote liberty are the richest men in the world. Either that or the most prominent with wealth. Like you got our President 45, upcoming 47, and you have Top G, and you got Musk. So you got these 3 guys who are extremely wealthy, and they're the ones leading the race towards freedom. And they're the ones standing up for freedom of speech more than anybody else, which I thought was pretty interesting because it seems like the common narrative is saying that the rich people are against us. I think it's the honest rich people that are for us, because they understand the true value of what work is about, and like wealth is the means towards human life, and so they honor that by trying to promote more freedom for more people.
I think you're definitely onto something there. I think the people like Hancock, people like Musk, people like Trump, and a lot of these guys, even like guys like Grant Cardone and people that have built enormous wealth for themselves, they realize the importance of having less government control, and they also understand the importance of having kind of this freedom and autonomy to work hard and be able to achieve something great. And because they've done it, right? I mean, they've had the ability to build this. And then you compare them to some of the other wealthy people that we look at in high regard. I mean, just look at some of these other people. Typically, the people that aren't in support of capitalism that are rich got rich because they were involved in a corrupt system. So, I mean, look at the Nancy Pelosi's, right? They didn't become rich because they worked hard for something. They became rich because they sold their soul to the devil, so to speak, in this corrupt, bureaucratic, socialistic system that that preys on the weak and builds the lines the pockets of the elite. And so I think you always have these. I think even back in the time of Hancock, you had these elitists that were loyal to the king. And the reason they were loyal to the king is they knew the king, if they stood against the king, they wouldn't have their wealth and their riches anymore. And so they were too afraid of losing all their wealth and their riches to stand up for what was right. And then you get somebody like Hancock that, says, you know what, I built my wealth, and it's not in any way because of really the king, and I don't owe any loyalty to the king, and I don't owe him anything based, I don't owe any of my wealth to him. There's no reason that the citizens of the United States shouldn't have the same opportunity as me, or the citizens at that time, the colonies, shouldn't have the same opportunities as me, shouldn't be free from the taxation of the king. And so I think there's always this, in history, you always have the people that are, and I don't want to say right side and wrong side of history, but that's essentially what it is. You have the people that are typically, the people on the wrong side of history are making at least the rich ones are making their money in a corrupt way that will be destroyed if the common good is achieved. The common good of the people, right? And so I think that's kind of like the paradigm. So you have these rich people that are like in it for themselves and are corrupt, and then you have the people that are actually self-made and independent of that corrupt system. It's very like interesting to see like the polar opposites, and yet they're still in the same tax. Like, I mean, in many cases, the same tax bracket, very close. It's fascinating. Like, I just look at like Elon Musk versus Bill Gates, and I think to myself that those are two very different people that have achieved similar status in society, right? And so, like, what is the difference there? One's in bed with the Nancy Pelosi's and maybe quite literally in bed with the Nancy Pelosi's. I don't know what Bill Gates is into. I'm just throwing out some juicy conspiracy theories. See if anybody latches on and gives us some proof for the next podcast. I'm ready to put it. We might do a tin hat podcast, guys. I'm like building up some material here. Give me like 3 weeks and I'll have a tin hat, a tin cape, and a tin set of armor. I'll come into the next podcast. But no, I think you're totally right, Tom. I think there's two very different types of wealthy people and successful people. And it's cool to see the wealthy people that are willing to stand up for what's right and stand up for true freedom. So I think that's pretty neat.
I've been reflecting on about the different founding fathers and how we have like Washington, who was wanting freedom from England because he saw what they were doing was unjust. You have Jefferson on the same page. He's saying, like, if you read the Declaration of Independence, actually, and look at all the grievances that were made against America, there were a lot. They documented them very well. They're saying, hey, this is not okay. We need to have more ability to talk with you, make sure these things don't happen, but more and more England stopped listening to them. And you have like Hamilton, who wanted a federal government because he wanted the idea of like a strong like force in the world, so to speak, in the US. and then he wanted to centralize power. You have Adams, who was like, yo, I don't know about these people, they seem kind of weird, I don't know if America's gonna last. And then I think he was wrong. I mean, Americans have been shown to be like some of the most resilient people in the world in history. Like, just think about Lone Survivor, for example. Like, that's like, that makes Greeks look a little weak. Like, let's be honest here.
It's a
like,
prime example right there. Lone Survivor. I love it.
Did they fall down 1,900 feet and keep shooting? I don't think so.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch Lone Survivor now.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Then you have Madison, who was.
Yeah, we didn't talk about Madison. I love Madison. Madison was just like the happy-go-lucky. It's
Yeah.
probably all gonna work out, guys.
Right. Yeah. He was
The opposite of Adams.
Yeah. He was like, this Constitution's a good idea. And he's kind of like, we're strong people. We know what's up. We're gonna stay together. And then, yeah, I think the other founding fathers kind of fell on that side. You had like Washington, who kind of broke the middle. He kind of fell aside to Hamilton. You have Jefferson over here, was like, yo, Hamilton, I don't know about this guy. He has some crazy ideas. One of them being a central bank. That's what made Jefferson leave, actually, which is really interesting. From the office as a secretary, right? Yeah, under Washington. And then you have Madison, who's kind of like in the middle. You have Hancock, who I think was more on Jefferson's side. Sure.
Correct. Yeah.
And then, then you had the other guys kind of fall in that spectrum. And I think we kind of went like, let's see if this would be diagram.
They leaned towards the Federalists a little bit in Hamilton.
Yeah,
they kind of followed suit. I feel like they followed suit a little bit with Washington, because Washington, towards the end of his political career, did lean more towards Hamilton rather than Jefferson. And I'm not really sure if that was just based on who he was surrounded with or what, but it seemed that way. Even though for the most part he was pretty bipartisan, he did lean slightly more what I would consider left on the political spectrum towards the end of his political career. And left is like, in today's terms, is like, if you're thinking about this in today's terms, like you're talking like right of center. I mean, that's what the left was back then. It was like right of center, because that's just where we are. The political spectrum kind of shifts. But yeah, you're totally right. It's such an interesting balance. Like, and it was almost the perfect balance that you needed to like bounce these ideas and these thoughts off each other to come to like a fairly common conclusion and decision on, okay, this Constitution thing needs to work somewhat like this, but then people push back on certain things and they're like, okay, we'll put in some clauses. Federalists are like, we'll put in some clauses. And the anti-federalists are like, okay, can we secede if we don't like it? And they're like, sure. I forget what states could secede. I think Virginia was maybe one of them. I think they're like, all right, Virginia, if you don't want to be part of it, you can be out of it if you don't like it. But it's just interesting to see like how imperfect yet perfect the founding fathers were. It was this group of men that like each one of them had their own problems, very human individuals. They all had their own problems. Even Jefferson had his issues, and so but they each had a lot to offer, I think, in the founding of our nation. And we wouldn't be here today, I don't think, if it hadn't gone like it had back then. I think you change one little thing and we could have had a completely different outcome, probably not for the positive. I mean, who knows? It's kind of a miracle we're still here, but we are.
Yeah, just a random thought that comes to mind. Thinking about how these guys, like all the different opinions across the board that we just discussed, and also considering how they were all rhetorical masters, very well educated individuals. I'd give anything to be a fly on the wall to hear one of those disagreements that they would have had. I feel like we would have heard probably some of the most eloquent, well-spoken insults that would just be so much different than the political discourse of today.
So you're telling me we wouldn't hear, "Come on, man."
Come on, Jack. No,
Come
we
on,
wouldn't hear
Jack.
anything like that. No. Sad.
It's been a sad turn of events. We have a man with dementia in the White House now that
Right.
they can't
Yeah.
formulate a sentence. I mean, it's pretty rough. Come on, Jack.
She'd say, yeah, Washington Hamilton would say to Jefferson, he'd call him low energy Thomas. Probably not. Probably not.
Guys,
Yeah.
I heard I saw this post today, and he said, Trump said that the Washington Post should be called the Washington Compost. I was like,
Oh, boy.
I couldn't stop laughing.
Oh, that's funny. That's a good one. The Washington Compost. Maybe we should make a T-shirt, Tom. Oh, that's fantastic.
Be like, careful where you eat from.
You are what you eat.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Oh, that's great. Well, on that note, I mean, we're getting close to the hour and 20-minute mark, so I don't want to drag on for too long. But I think we covered what we wanted to talk about pretty well there. Do you guys have any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I liked our conversation, and it's definitely got me thinking more about like the foundation of America. So, how do we, as like the young generation of Americans, keep leading it in the right direction as these men did? Like, it was really cool. Like, Washington was like the old guy and all these founding fathers. Like, these guys were like in their, some of them were in their teens, and then like early 20s, like late 30s was like the old guys, like really old, like geezers of the groups. So I thought it was really interesting that they were the ones that took the responsibility to bring freedom to America, and it's inspired me quite a bit to be like them and to also be inspirational and bringing more freedom to our fellow countrymen and women.
Yeah, it's never too early and never too late to take a stand and make a difference.
Exactly. Even when it seems impossible, the impossible can be achieved, and I think that's what they proved to us. So, no matter how bad it seems, I think there's always hope until it's all over, till we're gone, till China drops a nuke on us. No, I
There's
think
the John Adams in you just came out.
yeah, I'm pessimistic, guys. Don't worry. I'll bring my pessimism to the table and keep you guys in line. Well, thanks to all the listeners for tuning in this week. It was a fun podcast. We'll try to probably do, I don't know, maybe we'll have one more podcast on the Revolution, the Founding Fathers. I don't know. There's so much to cover here. It's like really tough to like get through a podcast like this and feel like we've covered everything. So I'm sure like by like mid next week, we'll already have like a whole new podcast like ready to roll on probably the same topic. But we'll see. I know we really wanted to touch on some of the things that happened during the Civil War. Me being in Georgia, I'm pretty close to some of the Civil War sites. So I wanted to try to, go visit and bring some of those firsthand kind of experiences and information to you guys, the listeners. But we'll see. We'll next week be joined by a guest, a friend of the podcast. So don't miss out on that. And then we'll be back the following week with our next in the kind of history of America series. So thanks again for tuning in. If you haven't already, follow us on Spotify, follow us on YouTube. We post the shorts from all our podcasts on there. If there's one you want to share with a friend, give us a like. You can rate us on Spotify. That would be huge. We actually have a couple ratings now, but if we could start getting those ratings rolling in and give us a follow on Spotify, that'd be great. But yeah, like, comment, subscribe. But until next week, stay strong, be vigilant, stay true to who you are, be a good neighbor, but most importantly, be a good American. Peace and have a great night.